Meadowbank School is very fortunate that they've got this section of native bush plonk right in the middle of the school, which is a great source of motivation. I talked about that we were going to go to the bush, and we did look at one or two pictures then. We looked at Peter McIntyre's and just generally talked about the shapes of the trees and looking at the trunks of the trees. And so when they went into the bush, they were more aware of what they were looking for.
The fern, what is it? Palmer fern, yes, look at it, behind it, beautiful. Take your viewfinder and hold it up and move it around and see if you can see anything, and make an interesting composition with your viewfinder. Remember to hold it out. Don't be like someone and hold it up like that and say, I can see everything. Hold it out and see if you can find some interesting shapes and compose a picture with get some trees and light showing.
We used a viewfinder mainly to get the composition of the picture. So they weren't looking at too broad a view, and I just wanted them to pick out interesting shapes as well as colour. I wanted to see the children drawing what they saw, making selections of other parts that were interesting that they could put into the picture as well. In other words, they were composing their own picture, really.
You see that the light's shining through, so you'll know when you come to paint that you're going to have patches of blue and probably patches of green. We've got different shades of purples, haven't we? We've got the darker purple here. Then it's going into what sort of toning is it going into there?
Pinkish.
When we came back from the bush, we looked more closely at the well-known artists and how they put paint on the canvas, the type of brush strokes they used, the backgrounds they used, as in the underpainting, and the use of cold and warm colours. And we particularly looked at Matisse painting of the olive trees, and Vlaminck, the way he painted different strokes on the trunks of the trees and the different colours. That trees just aren't generally brown, that other colours show up on the trees as well.
And look at the sky. Is it just a bright blue?
That other colours show up on the trees as well.
The tonings in the sky. We've got lights and dark blues. We're even going into pinks.
Then they drew up their pictures with the chalk. What some children tend to do is they try to put in too much detail with their just initial drawing up, and I didn't want them to do that. I wanted them just to place the trunks of the trees in the areas where they wanted them, and leave the detail till later when they overpainted. So they drew up in chalk, and then they blocked in the background. I always do painting in a large room like the hall, and I have the children organised in a square, all facing outwards, with the paint in the middle, so that at no time the children need to cross over anybody else's painting or get in the way of anybody else as they move to and from the paint. From looking at Matisse, we noticed that his background colours were the cold colours, the blues and the mauves and the purples. And the children tended to go that way when they did block in. I think using just basically primary colours was probably a difficult concept for the children of that age to understand. That they probably felt that's what it was going to look like at the end. They didn't realise that overpainting was going to get rid of that.
Tonings in there, the autumn tonings on the ground there, and the sky. It's lovely.
Which is very important, to discuss things with them as they go. Initially, talk about their composition, what they're going to put in, what they're going to leave out, because from their preliminary drawings, they can't put everything into the painting. Then, when they start to paint, it's encouraging them to try and be free with their paint and to experiment with the colours, to create new colours, exciting colours, and get them on the picture. It's hard for them to visualise what it's going to look like. They don't put enough paint on. So it's encouraging them to use as much paint as possible to get a good texture on the paper.
Lisa, in the autumn time, how do you know it's autumn?
We evaluate them all together. So after the initial painting of the trunks and the background, we went through them and talked about them, and it's important to be positive about the good parts that the children have done. So I try to be positive about each painting when we look at it together, and the children encourage the children to say, oh, that colour there looks good, or I like the way you've done the trunk. And the children are very good at that. And then you might make a suggestion of how they could improve this area or that area, or what do you think you're going to do next? Some children initially painted the trunks black, basically because that's what they'd observed in Matisse's painting, that his trunks were all black, and then he'd overpainted and dry brush painted those. So they did that too. They painted trunks black and then they overpainted. They added to it till they felt they had it looked like a good bush scene where they were surrounded by bush. And I particularly wanted them to show that in the foreground the leaves would be bigger in relationship to the background, so I wanted to see a variation in the size of the leaves and also the colours. It's very hard for children this age to get away from the idea that the sky is always blue, and we looked particularly at Peter McIntyre's skies in his paintings to see that the way he puts paint on the paper, it's very dramatic and lots of colours and mixtures of colours, and they looked at those to see that it wasn't just a sky blue in the background, there were other colours as well.